We'll call the Willmar City Council meeting to order for Monday, September 18th, 7 p.m. Roll call.
Mayor Calvin.
Here.
Councilmember Nelson.
Here.
Christensen.
Here.
Schwantes.
Here.
Alvarado.
Here.
Osmus.
Here.
Maskey.
Here.
Plowman.
Here.
Fagerly. 8 present, 1 absent.
Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Are there any proposed additions or deletions to the agenda? We have the consideration of the seal coat bid for the Civic Center, and then also we have consideration, I'm sorry, we were going to move that to the next meeting. I'd also like to have a consideration for additional members for a Rice Hospital Review Committee, a joint project between Rice Hospital and the Willmar City Council. And that will be after item number 16. Anything else, Councilmember Christensen?
Were we going to discuss something on the gun range too?
I believe the administrator was going to do that in her comments, but yeah, we're going to have to take a motion on it probably because we had taken a motion to close it, so we'll have to make a motion if we're going to reopen it. So the gun range, that's a good thing, right?
Where are you putting the other?
I'm going to put that under items removed from consent. Oh no, they have to go. That has to go after the public hearing, so that'll be item number 9 and 10 is where it'll go. So I put it in the wrong place on my agenda. Anything else? And staff, when we get to that seal coat item, can we make sure we're ready for that? Because we have to go to another agenda because it didn't get pulled forward. We don't have copies. So if you have that for us so that it'll flow a little easier when we get to that part of the agenda. Anything else for the agenda? Otherwise, with the additions, we will move to accept the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve the agenda as amended. Discussion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. That motion does carry. Next are consent items. Our city clerk, Ms. Thompson.
On the consent item agenda this evening, we have for approval the Willmar Municipal Utilities Board minutes of September 11th, Planning Commission minutes of September 13th, application of gambling exempt permit for the Glacial Ridge Curling Raffle, application to conduct excluded bingo at the Church of St. Mary, and for acceptance is the Central Community Transit Operation Board minutes of May 23rd, building report for the month of August, Fire Department statistics report for the month of August, and the accounts payable report through September 13, 2017.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve the consent items. Discussion. Seeing and hearing none, all in favor signify by saying, I'm in roll call. You got to get used to this roll call for that one.
Councilmember Nelson.
Aye.
Christensen.
Aye.
Schwantes.
Aye.
Alvarado.
Aye.
Osmus.
Aye.
Maskey.
Aye.
Plowman.
Aye.
7 ayes, 0 nays.
That motion passes. Next, we'll have a public hearing on the ordinance for Central Business District relating to fuel sales. Mr. Peterson.
Mayor Kelvin, members of the council. The city received an application from Quick Trip of La Crosse, Wisconsin for a text amendment to the zoning ordinance. They requested the amendment to allow fuel sales in the Central Business District. Historically, there have been a number of service stations in our Central Business District. Over the years, as Central Business Districts evolved, those service stations tended to go out on the highways and on the commuter routes to better serve the public. We've got a business now that's looking to create a facility in downtown Willmar that would provide fuel sales, but that would not be the primary intent of the business at this location. The Planning Commission discussed this matter and thinks that fuel sales are appropriate at certain locations in the central business district, and that's why they've suggested that the amendment be to allow them by a conditional use permit. And I think this makes a lot of sense because we do have a population, a demographic downtown that doesn't have access to some of the other businesses that are spread out throughout the city, and it makes sense to stay current with our ordinances and match trends. It's a recommendation of staff that the ordinance in front of the council tonight be adopted, assigned a number, and published.
So moved.
We'll take public comment first. Anybody here for the public that wishes to speak to this issue? Come up and state your name and address for the record, please.
Hi, Dean George, 1626 Oak Street, La Crosse, Wisconsin. I am with Quick Trip. It was our request. Thanks for the kind comments that were just made. We do intend to install fuel sales downtown, but we're not coming in with as large of an operation as we are on the Cenex Travel Plaza or on the south side location. It's going to be limited fuel pumps, and it is kind of a store we intend to have more of a walk-up grocery, walk-up food hotspot with some ancillary fuel options downtown. So that's kind of our intent, and we'd like to thank you, appreciate your consideration of our request.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And it's good to see you guys moving dirt, so.
We're working as we can. Well, I think the south side one is actually not us yet.
Correct. South side one is a Dairy Queen, I think, yet at this point, so, right. Yeah, thank you. Additional questions from the audience, from the public? With that, I'll close the public hearing, bring it to the council. Councilmember Christensen.
Also move staff's recommendation.
Second.
Motion been made and seconded. Discussion. Roll call.
Councilmember Christensen.
Aye.
Schwantes.
Aye.
Alvarado.
Aye.
Osmus.
Aye.
Maskey.
Aye.
Plowman.
Aye.
Nelson.
Aye.
7 ayes, 0 nays.
And that motion passes. Next, we have public hearing. Mr. Gary Peterson, you're up first. State your name and address for the record, please.
Gary Peterson, 2900 15th Street Southwest in Willmar, and I'm a firearm instructor with Minnesota Gun Class, and I understand that this topic with the indoor range was discussed at the earlier meeting. I was not here, so I don't know the discussion that was talked about on that, so I'll just give my 2 cents.
Sure.
I'd like to ask the council to reconsider the closing of the indoor range. There are safety issues that need to be fixed with a backstop. However, there are workarounds that will allow instructors to continue classes with no safety hazard. Several of the lanes are less frequently used and have much less damage. Sean Christensen and I went into the range this morning to verify this. 3 of the lanes could be safely used just as they are. Sean came up with another idea that would be even safer. If targets were positioned halfway down the range and the shooter was in the next bay over, the bullets would impact the backstop in the unused area between the damaged areas. It's only a slight change in the angle and would be completely safe. As we move into the colder months, it would be a hardship for instructors and students to shoot outdoors. I've done classes outdoors when it's below 0, and it is not fun. We have students coming to Willmar from up to 50 miles away. It's important for our class attendants and for area merchants who benefit from our visitors that we have a warm, dry range to welcome them. Please consider allowing certified instructors to use the range for scheduled classes with the restrictions mentioned above. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Appreciate it. Next, we have Johanna Reller.
Hi,
Name and address for the record.
Johanna Reller, 1215 Quincy Avenue. Good evening. I'm a registered nurse in the emergency room here at Rice. And firstly, I would, and most importantly, like to thank everybody for the questions that you asked and at the most recent meeting, and also, again, for the service that you do for our community. We really appreciate that. We appreciate the effort to share information, but the presentation at the meeting was short on details about how this arrangement would affect patients, our community, and staff. We continue to have unanswered questions. We would like to see some more guarantees about what was agreed to be put into action. Mr. Schramm said labor contracts would be honored, and Mayor Kelvin, you added some urgency to that, saying that this should be done quickly, and we agree. We're calling on Rice Memorial, Centricare, and ACMC to start talking directly with us, come to the table and negotiate a formal agreement on critical issues like all staff losing public pensions, honoring our contracts, and health insurance for starters. We need your guarantee that some of our rights will be that these rights will be preserved. We also want to make sure that you're aware of of a disturbing development that was made last week. Some of our staff have, including myself, received letters from Edward Jones Investments informing us that our public pensions would end and that we should plan for the future. We understand that these letters were sent by mistake, but it does raise questions about how Edward Jones got this personal staff information. This is very concerning for us, and we would still encourage you to continue to encourage these corporations to add nurses to the list of committees and include us in these talks. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Appreciate that. Next, we have consideration of seal coat for the Civic Center. Mr. Christensen.
Mayor Calvin, members of the council, in front of you, or apparently in front of you during the work session, was the seal coat project for the Civic Center parking lot. Civic Center parking lot was scheduled to be seal coated in 2018 CIP, or as proposed rather. After further examination due to the current condition and anticipated additional usage this winter, the need was evident to try to get it completed this year. We requested quotes of the facility and received 4, with the low quote being from Asphalt Surface Technologies in the amount of $33,737.50. Quotes were opened on September 11th, and the recommendation tonight is to award the project to Asphalt Surface Technologies in the amount of $33,737.50 and authorize signatures for that contract, as well as approve the reappropriation of $20,000 from capital projects purchase of Public Works International trucks and transfer that to Civic Center seal coat project.
I'll move staff's recommendation as long as it includes both of those.
Second.
Can one motion do that?
Yeah, one motion can do that, right? Yeah, yes, it can do that, right? Motion been made and seconded to approve the expenditure of $33,737.50 for the seal coat at the Civic Center, moving $20,000 from capital to the Civic Center line item budget. Councilmember Plowman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Christensen, 2 questions for you. Number 1, is striping a part of this project? And number 2, is doing this later in the season going to affect snow removal at all?
The short answer to both would be no. Let me explain. The bids were for the seal coat itself. The Public Works Department will do the striping, so that'll be taken care of, and we have enough time at this point to not affect snow removal.
All right, thank you.
Okay, again, we're expending $33,737.50 to do the seal coating at the Civic Center. Roll call.
Councilmember Schwantes?
Aye.
Alvarado?
Aye.
Osmus?
Aye.
Maskey?
Aye.
Plowman?
Aye.
Nelson?
Aye.
Christensen?
Aye.
7 ayes, 0 nays.
And that resolution passes. Next is an update on the gun range. At our last meeting, the council closed the gun range until some additional information could be brought back. It was brought up at our work session. We had an individual, Donovan Keel, address the council, and also at this meeting, you just heard from Mr. Peterson addressing the the gun range issue. So because it was formal action that was taken to close the range, we're still, my understanding, waiting for the financial reports to get done, to crunch those numbers. But Mr. Holland, could you give us an update on what's happening at the gun range?
Mayor and council, as of Thursday, when we put this agenda together, I did not have the financials nor the second inspection. Therefore, my hard and fast rule, at least the last 2 months, is that nothing goes on the agenda that I don't have on Thursday, and also if I haven't reviewed it. So therefore, that's why it's not on the agenda tonight. Plus, I did not have a guarantee that that inspection would take place, or I would have anything in writing on Friday. So that's why it's not on tonight, so I apologize for that. We tried to get that expedited as fast as we could, but having said that, the inspector did show up on Friday morning, and I did go over and accompany during the inspection, and I met with the inspector, and I would say he gave me a 45-minute dissertation on, gun ranges and the walls, and so he gave me way much more information than I required. But I'm grateful for that information. The conclusion of that was I asked him point blank range, can we open this back up? And he said, in his opinion, yes. He also said that the blocks do need to be replaced, that the previous inspection was true, but their life is still could go for 3 or 4 more months without any problem. So having said that, I think tonight the question I'm asking is not about the replacing of the blocks or the bids or anything like that. What I'm asking for is I'm recommending that we reopen the course, especially for those that have already scheduled classes in the next 60 to 90 days. And so we would limit it with that. We wouldn't add any more classes that have not been scheduled. In my understanding, there are numerous classes scheduled right now. These instructors don't just jump up and say, I'm having a class next week, because you have to get people to sign up and all that. So, Mayor and Council, that's what I'm recommending tonight. I will say that everything that I was told about the facility and what I observed was true, and so I didn't find any red flags that would make me second guess any of the inspectors or the inspection results.
Councilmember Miaski.
So the information we got before about this eminent ricochet concept of making it unsafe, we can operate it as we were operating it before.
Yes.
And it will be safe.
Yes.
I'll make a motion then that we reopen the gun range for the classes that have been scheduled.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to reopen the gun range as scheduled classes that are already on the schedule. Councilmember Schwantes, followed by Councilmember Nelson.
Administrator Holland, do we have that in writing from the inspector?
Yes, we do.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Nelson.
Just a clarification, Mr. Peterson spoke before when he was on the open forum about a certain method to be used. Is that the recommendation to do that from staff, or are you allowing all of the lanes to be used with any number of rounds? Because that was a conversation, I think, a question of the usage.
Right. And right now, all the lanes would be available with the provision that we still inspect, on a regular basis. And if any of those lanes became overused or someone used the wrong caliber, for example, and did further damage, speeding up that process, then we can close that lane. But right now, I would not make that recommendation that we, go to a certain lane or to alter, how they shoot down, down line.
Can I ask one more question? Just one more question. Who's responsible for monitoring that?
Right now, that's under Steve Brisendine's department.
No, but Steve's not.
But the facility is under Sean Christensen. Yes.
No, but I'm talking about who is at the gun range that physically monitors that.
I don't know the person's name. I don't know if Sean would know that.
Isn't that the range masters? Our Public Works Director is inferring that it's the range masters that look at that. Is that correct?
I don't need to know the name. I'm just wanting to know
That it gets
who
done.
physically
Somebody's doing
is
Right.
responsible for that.
Yeah, Councilmember Nelson, I don't know the names either, so I'm glad you don't
I don't
need to
wanna
know
know
those, but yeah, it's the range masters.
Range
that take care of
masters?
that on the shooting day basis, yes.
Okay. And they are through the gun safety classes? Is that?
Correct.
Certified.
Yes,
Rifle and
okay.
pistol club.
Thank you.
Additional discussion, Councilman Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And after the 90 days, are we planning on replacing these blocks during? Or?
My desire is to come back with way before 90 days. I hope to come back with a recommendation of cost and operational cost and present all that information to the council, and then you can make that decision. But I certainly won't wait until the 90 days expires. I want to get that taken care of beforehand.
Okay, thank you.
The goal was to have it on the agenda tonight, but we didn't have the financials done yet. We had some staff that were traveling on vacation, so we didn't get the information put together. But the goal was to have it back to you today because we knew that this was a critical time frame for the people in teaching gun classes like Mr. Peterson and his cohorts. So, additional discussions. Roll call? I'm sorry. Simple motion. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. That motion carries. And Mr. Peterson, the gun range is officially back open. So, thank you. Thank you for being here tonight. Next, we have consideration of a resolution setting the preliminary property tax levy. Mr. Okins is going to do that presentation, but before he does the presentation, I've had a number of calls from the community, and in hearing you as the council when you presented that information, when I presented it last week, that you were concerned about an increase in the levy. So let me offer to you an option that would not require an increase in the levy for you to consider before Mr. Okins makes his presentation. In that levy, there is $185,000 for the fuel system out at Public Works. And I've talked with Mr. Holland about this, and staff is looking at using local vendors to purchase our fuel so that we wouldn't have to replace those tanks. We wouldn't have to replace them this year. It would give us the option to buy local. It would give us the option to support our local businesses. We have two new businesses. We have a new business coming in with 3 new stations. They may be interested in providing service to us. But it would be a way that we could leave the levy flat. In other words, leave it the same as it was last year, not raise the levy, but yet continue through the rest of the process. The problem of doing that is that you don't raise the levy. If you don't raise the levy, you don't have additional taxes coming in. So in future years, you'd have that basically $145,000 less that you'd have available for you in future budgets. And so the levy would then at that point remain flat. So consider that as you hear the presentation from Mr. Okins on the levy and what the recommendations are for that. So we'll get a brief summary of the budget from Mr. Okins, and then consider that if you would like to keep the levy flat. That's one way that you could do it. And that is something we talked about last Tuesday night. Mr. Okins.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as the mayor mentioned last week, Tuesday, the mayor presented his budget to you. It was a balanced budget, and part of that process for funding that budget is setting a property tax levy on the properties in the corporate limits of the city of Willmar. This is an annual process that is done. It's required through the state of Minnesota, and the truth in taxation requirement is that taxing jurisdictions certify a preliminary levy to the county auditor by September 30th. The preliminary levy that is certified by September 30th is an amount that can be lowered but cannot be increased. What we are talking about tonight is only the city portion of that tax levy. We do have a slide where we have some comparative. Councilman Nelson asked for a comparative to other communities that we have historically compared to. The League of Minnesota Cities puts out a list of 19 regional centers. Those 19 regional centers that we compare to, if you look at the city column, the Willmar city levy is the lowest rate of all of the 19 regional centers. Last year it was the second lowest. If you look at the far right column on the total levy of 116.52 for the city of Willmar, the 34 it equates to 30% of the total tax levy. So a citizen who pays, for every dollar they pay in property taxes, 30 cents of that comes to the city of Willmar. The remaining amount is divided amongst the other taxing jurisdictions. 48 cents out of that dollar goes to Candiway County. 20% or 20 cents of a dollar goes to the school district, and the remaining 2% goes to special taxing jurisdictions, which would be the Housing Redevelopment Authority and the Economic Development Commission that was before you earlier this evening. The amount that the mayor had incorporated or put in his proposed budget to you was at a 3% increase, as the mayor mentioned. That amount then would be $4,974,245, which is $144,880 increase, as he mentioned in his opening remarks. That 3% levy increase on the dollar levy equates to about a 1 to 2% increase on a homeowner or a property tax due to new construction. We've been working with Candiway County to try to get the new construction. There's a number of factors that go into those discussions. They weren't able to provide it to us at this point in time. They have to convert the new construction value from market value to tax capacity values, and the mix of commercial, industrial, residential, they haven't got that done at this point. Part of their process is to send out a notification to all taxpayers, property tax owners in the city on what their proposed taxes will be compared to last year. That will include all the taxing jurisdictions that I mentioned earlier. Again, the budget as presented has the $4.9 million number included in it. The council has options tonight. We're asking, our recommendation is that you do pass the amount as was presented, with the alternatives of you can increase that dollar amount or you can decrease that dollar amount. If whatever dollar amount you decide to certify tonight to the county, it can be decreased but not increased. With that, I'll answer any questions.
I just want to make one more comment before we progress here, but if you take a look at these numbers, and I've had a number of conversations in the community within the last week since I did present the budget, Willmar currently, out of the 19 regional centers, is 67 cents less than anybody else of all the 19 regional centers. And as I said to one individual, you can't get lower than the bottom. We're at the bottom right now, guys. And so if we adopt this levy as it's presented, we're still not going to be at the top. I mean, you know, that's, you know, we're a long ways from that. $83.88 is the top. We're at $34.48. So with that, I'll turn it over to the council for their discussion. I just wanted to add those points. And if you chose to do what the mayor suggested, the dollar amount would be $4,829,365. Councilmember Nelson, followed by Meske.
I was going to make a motion to approve the resolution to set the 2018 preliminary property tax levy at the recommended amount of $4,974,245.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to adopt the levy at $4,974,245. Additional discussion, Councilmember Maskey.
Given the timing of the issue, I would like to see a lower rate as well, but until we have all that data and take a look at it, it's a timing issue for me, that we can always lower it, and ideas that you've shared one idea, but there could be other ideas to do that in the future, so given the timing of it, I'm fine with the motion.
Councilmember Nelson.
I appreciate the concept that you brought forward, and hopefully we will continue to look at that. I think it's in our best interest to do this, and we can always lower it later if needed. And I think it's appropriate to stay with the plan that's before us tonight.
Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Okins, maybe you could explain to the public how many cents out of each tax dollar the city actually takes in, and you could maybe explain the taxable tax capacity and how that, why you reference it in here per each city.
He mentioned it earlier, what we get, but you just wanted to go over it again? Is that what you're saying?
I know all these cities on here, the 19 cities. Willmar, one of the reasons our levy is lower, one of the reasons is because our taxable property is higher than a lot of these cities. That's one of the reasons our levy is lower. And that has to be taken into consideration when we're doing the budget and whether or not we want to increase the levy. But if you'd answer the first one, that'd be fine.
Yeah, and if you take a look at Moorhead, their tax capacity is 29 million
yeah.
compared to our 12 million, and they are number 17 out of the 19.
Mm-hmm.
That's just one example, correct? You want to explain that for the people that are watching?
Could I ask Councilman Christensen to restate his question, please?
He wants to know the tax capacity question. How do you come up with the tax capacity?
Okay. Tax capacity values, and this would be more of a question for an assessor and assessing department, but I'll attempt to answer the question to the best of my ability. The tax capacity value is a value that the state of Minnesota converts when you get an estimated market value on your property. The state of Minnesota converts that to what's called a tax capacity value. The reason that the state of Minnesota converts that to a tax capacity value, the main reason is they can determine which portion of the tax base will pay what portion of the property taxes, meaning industrial, commercial, residential. And so they have a formula to convert your market value to a tax capacity value.
And then go through those four numbers again, if you would, please. How much goes to the county, school, city, okay, and the special groups?
Of every tax dollar for the city of Willmar that you pay as a property tax owner, 30 cents of that dollar goes to the city of Willmar. 48 cents goes to Candy County. 20 cents goes to the school. That's based on the 2006 comparative numbers. 16 numbers that we got from the League of Minnesota Cities. And 2 cents goes to the special taxing jurisdictions of the Economic Development Commission and the Housing Redevelopment Authority.
That's information the public needs to be made aware of often, I think, and I would appreciate if this would be put on the website, you know, so people could see it. I mean, we mentioned it and referred to it tonight, but it'd be nice if people could see it.
It's been on every budget, on the budget slide for every mayor as long as I've been with the city.
Except this year.
No, except 2 years ago. So 2 years ago it wasn't there, but it's been there every other year. I asked Mr. Okins not to put it up that 1 year. You guys asked for it back, so I brought it back last year. And then again, it wasn't prepared. We had it, we just didn't have it with us on Tuesday night. So it had already been prepared. Mr. Okins, we used it when we put the budget together this time. It's just that we didn't have it on Tuesday night.
Mr. Mayor, if I could just point one other thing that I forgot to mention on the slide. If you notice that there's asterisks on a number of the communities, And those communities also have a valuable tool in their toolbox of a local option sales tax as well. A number of those communities, I believe there's 3 other communities outside of Willmar where the county does not have a transit tax of a half a cent as well. And we have that information. That information is available on the League of Minnesota Cities website. And one other thing I forgot to do on this slide is to put the source of this information, which is obtained from the League of Minnesota Cities.
And then, like you pointed out, 10 of the 19 cities have a local option sales tax.
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Plowman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, in hearing all of this, yeah, it makes a lot of sense, the route that it appears that we're going. You know, a 1 to 2% increase is not a large increase when we take a look at, you know, what we pay for property taxes, and I think most, well, I don't want to speak like that. I know for myself, a 1 to 2% increase is not going to have a devastating effect. However, I think, you know, hearing about a property tax increase, the emails and the phone calls and the people that stop into my office, that's all indicative of how people feel about tax increases.
Right.
So I think, you know, it's incumbent on us to get the proper information out there to the community so that they actually understand the dollars and the cents, how this is going to affect them. And, you know, sometimes it takes actually getting down to that level. Okay, how many more dollars are you going to pay in property taxes? And so I'm all in favor of expanding that information. As of right now, I think it's probably best, and I'm in favor to go forward with this. However, I do greatly appreciate the creative thinking and suggestion that was brought forward by yourself. I like that concept, and I think the community really appreciates that. When it comes to, you know, thinking outside the box, what can we do to curb, you know, make sure that our community is, you know, a low-tax community, inviting for people that both want to move here, live here, establish businesses here, whatnot. So for that reason, I encourage us to further explore any available options to, you know, find to make it such that we don't need to raise the levy. And if we can think creatively and find one of those solutions, I would be more in favor of that. As for the moment, I will support what's on the board with the hopes that we will be able to do that. Thank you.
Seeing here no additional questions, the motion is to consider the adoption of a resolution setting the primary property levy for the city of Willmar at $4,974,245. Roll call.
Mr. Mayor?
I'm sorry, Councilmember
Excuse
Christensen.
me. I think it would be appropriate to insert the word preliminary.
Yep.
Because this isn't the final.
Correct. If I didn't say preliminary, I read it wrong because I have it right in front of me as preliminary.
Okay, thank you.
So it should be preliminary. Correct. Right. Roll call.
Councilmember Alvarado.
Aye.
Osmus.
Aye.
Maskey.
Aye.
Plowman.
Aye.
Nelson.
Aye.
Christensen.
Aye.
Schwantes.
Aye.
7 ayes, 0 nays.
That resolution passes. Next is a consideration of Municipal Development District Amendment and the creation of a TIF district and set a public hearing. Mr. Peterson.
Mayor Kelvin, members of the council, approximately 2.5 months ago, the council gave preliminary approval to a TIF district concept for a portion of First Street south of actually be the blocks on each side of First Street south of the fire station. We have received an official application from B&B Properties of Minnesota for the creation of a redevelopment tax increment financing district. The project would initially include approximately 7,600 square feet of retail, office, and restaurant development with a second phase of 3,000 square feet planned, and that's all for the west side of First Street. The district boundary is being sized and shaped to allow the creation of a redevelopment district that will provide for a possible third phase in the future on the east side of First Street, where we've already got some deteriorated structures and underutilized properties. The proposal is to establish the district as a 26-year district, which is a maximum allowed by state statute. It gives the city flexibility for future redevelopment in that area. But to create the tax increment financing district, we also have to amend the central business district municipal development district as well. A large portion of the area being proposed for the TIF district consists of substandard structures. Properties on the east side of First Street, as I mentioned, are currently developed but are either substandard or underutilized. Most of the properties on the west side of First Street have already been removed by the owner of the property. The developer wishes to push his project forward, provided a reasonable level of tax increment financing assistance is provided. We've done the preliminary calculations and been able to inform the developer what could be paid back to him over a period of 15 years, because that's all we're recommending for the west side development, is that there would only be 15 years of tax increment paid back to that developer. As the council is well aware of, we get requests for public assistance, and there's questions of whether or not government should be involved in these projects. This project, due to the extreme high cost of demolition and site preparation, shows a definite gap in financing the project. Because those costs are already incurred in acquisition and demolition, it's not reasonable to expect a private developer to redevelop the property without having prospects for a positive rate of return. The crux of tax increment financing is that the taxing jurisdictions will all continue to receive the taxes currently being paid on the tax capacity for those properties. Those same jurisdictions will be asked to forego the increase in taxes for a period of between 15 and 26 years, depending upon the ultimate level of redevelopment. The but-for test is met from a financial standpoint, in that the developer has stated and shown that the project is not feasible but for the use of tax increment financing. Council has two primary alternatives at this point. One would be to initiate the process to amend the development district and to create the tax increment financing district by setting a public hearing. And the other alternative is to not pursue the use of tax increment financing for the project. The recommendation of staff is twofold: to set a public hearing for the October 16th, 2017 meeting to consider the geographic amendment of the Central Business District Municipal Development District. And the second motion staff recommends is to set a public hearing for the October 16th, 2017 meeting to consider approval of a tax increment financing plan for that proposed project.
Council will take them one at a time. Is there someone wishing to make a motion to consider municipal development district amendment and creation of a new tax increment financing district and set the public hearing for October 16th?
I'll enter that motion.
Second.
Motion been made and seconded. Discussion. Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. One of the dislikes I have about government is we and other governments picking winners and losers. You say on here that they've met the but-for test from a financial standpoint. Who determined that? Was it Mr. Peterson, yourself, or who determined that the but-for test was made? Because I think many times when we do tax abatements in TIF districts, these people would go ahead and do it without it anyway. I mean, how was that but-for test presented? I mean, how do you determine it?
Mr. Peterson.
Councilmember Christensen, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the developer has provided some preliminary numbers that we've been able to look at, and I think the important thing to remember, and if you look at private business, you'll certainly understand that people don't do this as a act of charity or an act of benevolence. They look to develop these projects for a profit. So there is an understanding that a reasonable rate of return would be available to the developer. Because of the amount of investment that's already gone into those properties for acquisition and demolition, there's no way that property can be sold or transferred for development of anything. And I shouldn't, that's probably too broad. For this particular project, you cannot develop that property and get a reasonable rate of return because of the embedded cost that already exists in those properties. The but-for test includes that analysis of the rate of return, and but for the use of tax increment financing, you can't get that reasonable rate of return, and that's the premise upon which the recommendation is made.
And yet, anybody in business knows that there's a risk when you do something like this. There's a risk in buying that property and doing the demolition. We all know that. It's like we're guaranteeing them a profit by using a TIF district. And, you know, nobody guarantees me a profit, and I know about the risks because I take them every day. And I know about owning property and paying the taxes on it. But I don't get any TIF district. I don't get any tax abatement, and nor do other businesses in Willmar. I've been against the abatement and TIF districts for the last, I don't know, year, 18 months. Because it's the people that have the money to get them. And I don't even want to see this go to a hearing, personally, because of those reasons. Again, we're picking winners and losers and guaranteeing somebody a profit. In the real world, that shouldn't happen. You take the risk that you think you're going to get a profit from, and just because they bought it and they had some demolition costs, we're supposed to come forward with the monies with this TIF district over 15 years? For myself, I don't think so.
Councilmember Metzke, followed by Councilmember Schwantes.
Just to piggyback on that, it is for 15 years as an anticipation. Why 26 years? Are we giving that extra 11 years of TIF district designation?
Councilmember Metzke, Mayor Kelvin, members of the council, the additional 11 years would not be increment paid to this developer. The additional 11 years of the district are being set up to accommodate a possible third phase. If the property owners on the east side of First Street also decide at some point to redevelop, the council has the option sometimes within that 26 years to determine how long that district can be extended to accommodate their development. The TIF district revenues will be calculated. They will be set at a fixed amount. We will have a tax increment financing note that addresses that, so we will not be paying, that is a not to exceed amount that we pay the developer. So regardless of what happens on the east side, the initial developer is going to have a fixed payment over those 15 years. And the council will have complete flexibility in the future to deal with that third phase. But by setting the district length at 26 years now, we don't have to come back and go through the TIF plan geographic amendment. We can go in and do financial amendments, which are much easier to do.
Councilmember Schwantes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to admit that when it comes to tax abatement and tax increment financing, it's my preference that it be used for manufacturing because the multiplier effect is that much greater. But when I looked at this, I had to ask myself what's in the best interest of the city long term. And when you drive down First Street, we've got an empty lot, we've got some tough-looking buildings, and it doesn't show our best step, our best foot forward. And I think that to have the development in this area would be very attractive for the city. And as people travel through town, it shows that we're progressive and growing, and when you have activity, it begets more activity, and I do believe it would be in the best interest of the city, long term.
Okay, and we're setting the hearing tonight, so it's a simple motion. Any additional discussion? Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not against development and making First Street better and brighter than it is. However, again, we're picking winners and losers, and I mean, development will happen. It just takes time. I mean, we've seen other properties when we get demolition happen and then something pops up. I mean, the Dairy Queen out south of Willmar, and the Dairy Queen out east of Willmar, and now a Quick Trip coming in 2, 3 different places, and going downtown I think is great. I don't believe they asked for, did they ask for tax abatement or a TIF district? And they're taking a big risk coming in here, but they do the numbers, and they're going to make a profit, and we don't have to guarantee them a profit, so.
Well, they did not ask for any abatement or, right.
That's what I mean.
You're correct. Right.
So it happens. It just takes the right people, and they see a bright future in Willmar, and I'm so glad they're coming here with 3 quick trips. I mean, especially one downtown, my gosh, it's needed. I don't think they'll be selling diesel fuel, but I'm not against improving Willmar and developments. It's just how we go about it and picking the winners and losers. Thank you.
This discussion. All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign.
Aye.
That motion does pass. Next is consideration of adopting a resolution, consideration of municipal development district. Where am I, Bruce?
12.
We have to set the public
11.
hearing to
Please
consider
have
the
the
approval
second
of tax
motion.
increment.
Oh, sure.
financing
That's right.
for this
Oh, unless
proposed
you,
project.
that's right, you had to do 2 motions. I stand corrected.
I'll enter the second motion.
So so the first one, we developed the district.
We
And
amended
now-
the development district.
We amended the development district. Now we're creating the district.
The TIF district will be created within the municipal development district, yes.
Motion been made. Is there a second to what Bruce just said?
Second.
Okay, so Bruce, walk me through that one more time. So what we did is we amended it so we could do it, and now we're establishing it.
Right, under Minnesota statutes, typically a project area is created or designated, and the term that's used typically is a municipal development district. Years ago, a central business district was, a municipal development district was created for the central business district that had as its boundary Minnesota Avenue. So we're proposing to enlarge that municipal development district so that this TIF district can be created within that expanded portion.
And that public hearing would be set for October 16th as well.
Yes.
Motion's been made and seconded. Discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. That motion does carry. Consideration of adopting a resolution for Sunrise Estates utility easement vacation and set a public hearing. Mr. Peterson.
Mayor Kelvin, members of the council, the city did receive a petition for a utility easement vacation in Sunrise Estates. That's a portion of the city that's on 23rd Street Southeast. Right now, we have a 12-foot utility easement that encumbers 6 feet on each side, or it previously encumbered 6 feet on each side of a lot line. There was some replatting, and in that replatting, it was in 2005, there was a note that the easement was to be vacated by the developer. The developer did not follow through with it, and that easement was not caught previously in title work, but now that the people that own the home want to sell it, no one wants to buy it with a 12-foot easement running through the center of the house. So we need to proceed with this process to help these people out, get their property marketable, and staff recommends that a public hearing to consider that vacation be set for the October 2nd, 2017 City Council meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to set a public hearing for a resolution for the utility easement vacation and for that public hearing. Discussion. Roll call.
Councilmember Osmus.
Aye.
Meske.
Aye.
Plowman.
Aye.
Nelson.
Aye.
Christensen.
Aye.
Schwantes.
Aye.
Alvarado.
Aye.
7 ayes, 0 nays.
That resolution does pass. Next is consideration of an ordinance text amendment relating to Central Business District design standards and set the public hearing. Mr. Peterson.
Mayor Kelvin, members of the council, this is an issue that is rather unique in that we typically do not have ordinance amendments directly coming from the Planning Commission or initiated by the Planning Commission, but in the course of reviewing the proposed Quick Trip development in the Central Business District, the plans were approved contingent upon the ordinance amendment that was discussed earlier. The Planning Commission, in reviewing their downtown development standards, noticed that the Quick Trip project would not meet those development standards as they currently are drafted. A couple of years back, there was a subcommittee of the Planning Commission that worked with staff to develop some specific development standards for the central business district. One of those was that there would be 40% of walls facing right-of-way would be composed of windows. This is something that the Quick Trip project does not meet, and the Planning Commission thought that was too restrictive, and they wanted some more flexibility. So what they're proposing is that there would be an ordinance change that would allow them to make decisions on architectural standards based on where the building is located with respect to neighboring buildings, to maintain some consistency that way, and not just to have a blanket standard for glass for every property. So again, I would recommend that the council conduct a public hearing on the October 2nd meeting to consider the proposed text amendment relating to the central business district design standards.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to introduce a motion to set a public hearing for October 2nd for text amendments to the central business district. Discussion. Councilmember Alvarado.
Public Planning Commission Director Peterson, are they going to come with some ideas for us to see, or we're just going to let them do their own thing, or what's the thought there?
Well, the ordinance language that they're proposing is, it used to read, all facades at street level adjacent to the public right-of-way shall be consistent with, shall be consistent with adjacent properties composed of at least 40% windows that allow a clear view into or out from the building. The remaining 60% of the building wall or privacy glass, reflective glass or full glass is not permitted. What they want it to read now is all facades at street level adjacent to the public right-of-way shall be consistent with surrounding architectural development. So they want it to be rather flexible, rather non-committal in my opinion. And the Planning Commission, the people that this council appoints to that Planning Commission will be making that decision when they do these architectural reviews in the future.
Oh, so there will be some sort of plan for somebody to see, in other words?
There will not be a formal plan that I could put in front of the council and say, okay, this is what you can expect. The Planning Commission will take individual plans as submitted by developers and review them in the context of consistency with adjacent architectural design.
And I can appreciate the Planning Commission doing that, so, okay, thank you.
Additional discussion, again, setting the public hearing. Councilmember Plowman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to put it in simple terms, I'm under the assumption, correct me if I'm wrong, that how the building lies on the lot or whatnot, according to how things work correctly, that a good majority of the building would have to be surrounded by windows. And if there's, say, a backside to the building or whatever, because of the lay of the land and the lot structure, they would have to have windows on the back of their building, which would make absolutely no sense. So this gives the Planning Commission the flexibility to look at these on a case-by-case basis and determine whether or not that's appropriate.
Absolutely. They know what their intent is, and their intent is to have sufficient glass to see in and out of the building, but you don't need to see into every side just because it's adjacent to a right-of-way. So you are correct.
All right, thank you. I'll make that motion to...
We have a motion in a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Additional discussion. Councilmember Nelson.
So, Mr. Peterson, was there a way to do this as an exception versus changing the ordinance?
Years ago, I would have said yes, because the standards for granting variances were a lot more flexible. Minnesota legislation has tightened up the statutory requirements for variances, and a variance is no longer possible because they cannot meet the statutory standards for the variance. I think in this case the text amendment is warranted, and it allows the Planning Commission the flexibility to stay abreast of changing development trends, and as Councilmember Plowman said, address these on a case-by-case basis within the context of the development that's occurring. So.
I struggle with the concrete building on First Street that has no windows to the street and to Candy Height, or wherever avenue that is. So I just have a concern about creating an environment where that's allowable based off from the plans. So.
Councilmember Nelson, I understand that concern. There are certain businesses and certain types of businesses and buildings that just do not allow themselves to that glass. Now, the Planning Commission did work with Goodwill, and you'll notice they have quite a bit of glass on their 19th Avenue side. That's actually not even glass into the building. It's architectural panels made to be made to look like glass. So, in a central business district, typically you want people to be able to see into the building. You want people to see out of the building to create that vibrancy, that sense of activity on the sidewalk level. Because of the type of businesses that we're talking about here, that's really not the same type of business that you would have to have that standard. You're not in a convenience store and a grocery facility like that. You don't have the same level of interaction, interior to exterior, exterior to interior, that you'd have with, say, restaurants, pubs, whatever that would locate in the central business district. So, little bit different based on the type of business itself.
Additional discussion. Councilmember Meske.
I've advocated for a historic preservation committee a few times at retreats and such. Can we have a two-tiered ordinance system where you have one for a central business district, and if we were to identify at some point a historical district in Willmar, where you would have two sets of standards? Because as this is going to be one overarching ordinance for all of that construction at this point.
This ordinance will apply to only properties within the central business district as zoned, yes. It would not apply outside of that area. And the second part is we do not have a designated historical district. It's been discussed, but our Planning Commission has never taken it to the point where they would recommend creating an actual historical district, because when they've mapped out historical structures, there aren't enough of them or enough of a concentration of them to really create a district.
Well, I would say that that's been still being explored. I've seen some conceptual stuff on where that could happen. My question would be, though, because it would probably overlap, is it inappropriate somewhere down the road? I'm thinking into the future, if you were to establish such a district, they would overlap. And if we set this would be rules for both if they existed, correct?
If you had a historic preservation overlay district, you could have standards that would apply to, I think you could safely regulate historical structures from new construction. You could separate the two in how they're regulated.
Okay.
All in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, same sign. That motion does carry. Next is consideration of additional insurance. This is a continued discussion that's coming back from the discussion we had in regards to additional insurance for sewer backup. So our city clerk, Ms. Thompson.
Mayor and members of the council, this topic was brought up at an August 7th meeting, and staff was directed to obtain some additional information as far as premiums that have been paid by the city in the past. That information is before you. Currently, we don't have any funds designated for sewer backup when the city is not found liable. And our insurance rep that was at our August 7th meeting did give us some options of 3 different types of coverage for $10,000, $25,000, and $40,000 with the premium dollar amounts. It is staff's recommendation that we not purchase additional insurance for the sewer backup incidents, because it's more beneficial for the city to pay the claims themselves than to pay for the additional insurance. Other alternatives would be not purchase the additional coverage for sewer backups, but the city will pay the homeowner's insurance deductible for sewer backup damage, or approve the additional policy at a desired level.
So again, council, as a reminder, this is, we had a couple citizens come after the last flood that we had, and they were concerned about backup into of their sewer. The one in particular was a clog that happened within the sewer system, and that was not due to a rain event. And so the gentleman was here along with his wife, asking for us to consider this additional coverage. Again, on the coverages, it was going to be determined by the amount of rainfall as to whether the coverage would be in effect or not in effect. And so that's, we asked for it to come back, and so staff is bringing it back to us. So council, we need to decide if we want to do something here or just leave it like it is. If we want to do something, the order would be someone would make a motion to buy one of the insurances, either at the $10,000 level, the $25,000 level, or the $40,000 level. Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to make it clear, this is not for flooding. This is for sewer backup. Strictly, it's our system. The city owns it. They own from their property line into their house.
Right.
I don't think we have that many claims. I mean, per year. There's not our system is working pretty good. So I wouldn't opt for buying insurance for that. I think that's kind of silly. But I think we should have some kind of a policy on when it does happen. We always, when the couple was here, Sean, I think explained that it wasn't the city's fault at that time. I wasn't convinced of that, but I do think that when something fails with the sewer system, we should help somehow, whether it's paying their deductible and to have sewer backup insurance, they have to have it on their homeowner's policy. You can't, it isn't automatic.
Right.
You have to opt for it, and then they pay so many dollars extra per year on their premium. And in Willmar, I've heard that although guarantees like up to $5,000. I mean, from insurance companies. I don't know if that's correct, but that's what I've heard from my insurance man. And so I think it would be appropriate for us to help when our system fails outside of their property line. I think we should have some kind of a policy to help out. I don't know what amount or what to do, but maybe we could have staff do some research on that and see what they think. But I think it's appropriate. If our system fails, you help these people. It doesn't happen that often, though.
So I'm hearing you say that you want to help them with their deductible or with the dollar amount. But you're not interested in buying the insurance. Did I hear that
correct?
correctly?
I think staff's recommending that. I don't think we're going to pay that much money out in 5 years.
Sure. Councilmember Nelson.
So when I read this, I was confused with whether we're agreeing to be responsible for it. And if we have one claim, I'm looking at the premiums versus the benefit of what we would spend versus what we would pay in an insurance premium. So I'm confused with the analysis of how it wouldn't, if we're going to be responsible for it, why wouldn't we purchase the insurance?
Because it doesn't happen that often.
Right.
If I may, yeah.
But if it happened once a year, it would be less expensive to have the insurance, wouldn't it?
We're only going to pay the deductible to someone's policy. And so...
But we don't know what their deductible would be, do we?
No. I mean,
and how would we agree to do that? I'm trying to understand.
I know. I'm saying. But I'm just saying, no, I don't know people's insurance deductible. We all have different. Some people have $100, some people have $500, some have $1,000. But we're not assuming liability or blame necessarily is what we're saying. Just like in the last case there, we said that it was not the city's fault. But if we had this policy, we would have paid their deductible. Does that make it easier to understand?
Right, but so if we're saying don't get the policy, but pay the deductible,
Yes.
how are we limiting our exposure?
Well,
Am I missing the boat?
no, you're not. I think I'm tracking, and if, are we going to have 10 cases? Are we going to have 20 cases a year? I don't think we're going to have that. I think that there's a limited amount of incidents that occur. I think that when we had this conversation a few months ago, it was brought to my attention that this only occurs like once or twice a year, if that, people coming forth with these type of problems. So that our risk is very low that we're going to have an epidemic of, sewer backup problems.
But are we assuming then if there is a backup that we're going to pay their deductible?
Yes.
Or we're
Yes.
going to review each one?
We would still review each one, yes. Yes.
I'm confused.
Councilmember Maskey, followed by Schwantes, followed by Christensen.
As I read this, we currently will do nothing, correct?
If it's not our fault, we do not pay anything.
Right.
So that's the cheapest way.
Yep, and then the alternative would be what you're talking about is that if we don't go with the insurance, we pay a deductible. We currently do not do anything.
Correct.
And I think we talked, and you said maybe 1 or 2 times a year, but can staff really recall? Because I thought we're talking about it happens even less frequently than that.
And you're right, it's maybe twice every 3 years.
Yeah,
it's really small.
Right.
Councilmember Schwantes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would argue that there are occurrences that people are simply not coming into the office to report. I know of 2 within the last year, and one for sure was not brought forward. So I have a concern that once you open the door, all of a sudden you've opened the door, and there may be claims that otherwise would not have come forward, but gee, now that I know that you've got this insurance in place, I would be happy to come in and have a conversation about it, and then it gets tough to say, at what point is it our responsibility to pay that or not pay that?
Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We have a great public works crew, and they make sure the system is working. Our system can fail, but they keep it clean. And if you ask a plumber, most of these sewer backups happen between the property line and the house. They put something down, the kids put something down, and that's how it backs up. We have to find that it happened in the street. If we find it happened between the property line and the house, that's their baby. So we would not pay that deductible. I mean, cause and effect. I mean, you do something and it's on your property, it's your baby. And I suspect that 99% of them are from the homeowner, the sewer backups. It isn't the city fail, because we got a good system here.
Councilmember Schwantes, followed by Nelson.
So then that's my confusion, because I thought that was Councilmember Meskey's question of when do we pay or when don't we pay, and would we be paying when it was not our error? Because now we don't pay if it's not our end of the street, we don't pay. If it's on the homeowner's property, it's their responsibility. So if it's not our error, we're not paying. And I thought what I heard said from his question was that if it was not our error, we would be covering it.
Right. And that last case with the Johnson family, our insurance provider determined that it was not the city's fault.
Right.
Okay, but then the council said, but what if we did pay that deductible? That was the question posed to the staff. And so that's what I'm reporting back. So when you say it that way, that means you're going to pay whether it's your fault or not, as long as they also have insurance, so that we're only covering the deductible. That was my understanding to the question posed.
The city attorney wishes to speak to the issue. Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Just to hopefully kind of explain the lay of the land a little bit. The city won't pay anything if the city's not at fault. That's the current policy. That's, I think, what most cities, that's the approach they take. being at fault means doing something negligent in your maintenance of the system where a backup that could have been prevented but for the city's negligence is not prevented, and it damages property owner's home. In those cases, your insurance would pay. What we're talking about are the, I think, rare occurrences where the city was not negligent, yet there is a backup that occurs that was not the homeowner's fault. So it came through the city system through no fault of the city's. It just happened for some reason. But that was not a situation where the city's at fault and the city's insurance would pay. So we're talking about now the city has no legal obligation to pay those claims. Some cities, I think, do. There's obviously insurance available to cover those situations. What you're discussing, I think, would be a proposal where the city would voluntarily, though it's not legally obligated to do so, assume responsibility for paying a homeowner's home insurance deductible in those cases where the backup is not the fault of the homeowner and it's also not due to the negligence of the city.
Councilmember Nelson.
So I guess I still have the two-part question. Are we changing our policy to pay? And then if we are going to change our policy to pay, are we then going to do a guesstimate on whether the insurance would be less expensive or just paying it in cash? So that's my question, because I wasn't sure if our goal was to pay.
Well, there's currently no motion on the table, but one thing that's being suggested is that we would cover the deductible with cash out of our operating budget. The other, which staff brought back, which we asked them to, is that we would buy the insurance. In the absence of a motion, it stays the way it is where we don't cover anything. Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Some of these backups occur in the older sections of the city where the plumbing going to the street is in really poor condition, and it fails, and it backs up, so they quit flushing the toilet. The city does have a policy of helping those people dig it up, put the new stuff in, and I forget what the amount is. Is it $1,500 per happening? So we are helping in a sense for some of the sewer backups that are happening because of that. When they break, we have a policy that says we'll kick in $1,500, what it costs you to dig up, put a new pipe in. It helps us and them.
Councilmember Meske.
Well, this is one of those rare times when you may be waiting for a motion, but it doesn't come because we want to keep doing what we do. So, I mean, if somebody wants to make a motion, I hope that happens soon. Otherwise, maybe we can move to the next agenda item.
And generally, we like to have the motion before we have the discussion for that reason.
Yep.
But this is so convoluted, I thought we had to have the discussion first.
Understand, but
Is anybody wishing to make a motion?
the motion would be to, if people wanted to stay the same, you probably wouldn't make a motion to keep it the same. Because it's already there. That's my.
Well, it would be mute to make a motion to leave things the same, wouldn't it?
Exactly. That's why I'm wondering if you're waiting for something that might not happen.
I'm waiting for a cessation of the discussion. I think it just happened. Okay, next we're moving to consideration of comprehensive civic center master plan consult services. Mr. Christensen.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. In front of you, make sure I get to the right agenda item here. For your request, I've brought back the proposals received after requesting them for the master plan, complex master plan for the Civic Center. We, as far as the history goes, staff was asked to re-contract the 4 proposers from the first time, and I did that and received their information. They were resubmitted from 3 firms. My apologies, and went through the selection committee again. The staff is recommending giving the proposal to 292 Design Group out of Minneapolis as a recommended firm at an estimated cost of $47,375, which, by the way, will require a budget amendment to fund the project because this was not budgeted for this year.
So is there anybody that wishes to make a motion to approve the expenditure for the Comprehensive Civic Center Master Plan Consult Services in the amount of $47,375?
I will make that motion.
Second.
Motion been made and seconded. Discussion. Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is it necessary at this point in time, or couldn't that be put on next year's budget? I mean, I have a feeling what they're going to come up with. I mean, when these guys who do these, consultants come in and do a master plan, I know they're going to say we need a curling club, additional locker room space, but pretty much everything that's got on here. And then it's up to us to say, yeah, we want this, this, and this, and we're talking about a lot of money here. You have a very aggressive budget for next year, and which is fine, but this is going to make it even more aggressive the following years. I question the timing of it and the expense. We don't have it anywhere, and I'm sure they can find it, because we've got monies that weren't spent last year that could be spent on this, or 2 years ago, I think it is. But I just question the timing of this, and anytime we hire a consultant to do something like this for newer and bigger things, it usually comes back with recommending what's on the list. And all those things are costly, but we should maybe pick 2 or 3 of them out of there. And you know, maybe Mr. Brizendine, he's in that business, he could help us out. Consultants are fine, but God, we use them every corner we turn, we use a consultant. I mean, and sometimes our staff can do the job. And the only thing I heard here then is timing. I don't have the time to do it. But I think Mr. Brizendine's office could look at some of these things and come up with a recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Fuentes.
Thank you. Caught the nod. I would like to note that we've had considerable discussion about this, both pros and cons, on a number of occasions. In May, we had asked staff to obtain the bids, and they did, and we did not move forward with it. And then we more recently directed them to do that again. It'd be shame on you twice if we ask for them for the bid and then we do not act on it. And I think to show that we as a council can be consistent in our decisions, that we need to move forward with this proposal.
Councilmember Nelson.
I spoke in favor of this, and the reason that it was brought back to us again was to make sure they went back to all the consultants, got them to rebid this, which they did. We are looking over a period of 5 years in the capital improvement program right now. I believe it adds up to about $4.5 million to spend at the Civic Center. I think it merits doing a master plan to make sure that we are spending those dollars appropriately, or perhaps there are ways not to spend those dollars. And I think, you know, we were on track to do this early on. We derailed it to do our retreat. We did that. It's back, and I am speaking in favor of doing this to move forward before we start to spend CIP dollars out there, to make sure that we end up with something that suits this community for the long haul, not just for the next years.
Councilmember Plowman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. With respect to the Civic Center, I appreciate the attention that's been given in the budgeting process to the projects at hand, and also this past year with the things that have taken place out there regarding the roofing, and now discussion tonight around the seal coating. I believe what we gleaned from our council retreat was kind of our priorities list, our short list. The one thing that concerns me a little bit with this is I want to keep that short list short so that we can stay like pinpoint focused on what we're trying to do. And I worry that if we create a new master plan for something, that it might be another master plan that gets shelved and has to get dusted off in the future because we have fires to put out, so to speak. So I'm going to actually speak against it because I believe that these are soft costs that we can hang on to. This is $50,000 that we could hang on to now. Go after the things that we have identified, and then in the future, as we cross some of these off of our short list, then we can, I'm hoping that we can have future productive retreats like we have been having, to then create new short lists, and I think that this would integrate well into that. So it's not as though I'm against the project. I would not like to see these soft costs be absorbed at the current time. Thanks.
Councilmember Nelson.
I'm really struggling with this. We've made a letter of intent to the curlers. There is a group meeting out there on another project that I think some other people are involved in. I'm really struggling with why we wouldn't take the high road here and take a look at what this facility could be and what it needs to be in our community 10 years from now or 20 years from now. I think we're being penny wise and pound foolish when we're talking about spending $2.5 million. It still needs to be determined where that needs to be. We need to figure this out. We're talking about adding on and locker rooms and all sorts of things. I don't know that I can support doing those without having a plan in place for what this facility should be in the future. So I urge you to reconsider. I think this is the right thing to do, and I do think it speaks to our priorities that we talked about at the retreat.
Councilmember Meske.
I was originally against doing this because I thought it put the priority of this particular building above the priorities of all the other buildings before we had them prioritized. But then we went, and we're saying now, and it's in the preliminary budget phase, but we're talking about getting the ice redone. If we're going to put a $2.5 million investment there, this would provide a little guidance for that. But also don't put the cart before the horse and go, well, there needs to be $4.whatever million put into that facility. I don't want to hear those comments yet because you don't know what those dollars are going to be until you see this plan. So I'm reluctantly moving forward with the plan because we were going to be, it was our priority to put $2.5 million into this ice structure. But all these other talks that you were talking about, putting this, this, and this, those are wish lists, and I don't think we should be talking about those until you know what it is from the plan. That's why I will reluctantly come on board with the plan, because we are making a huge investment into that building. But before I spend any other dollars, we have to make sure we know what those priorities are going to be.
Councilmember Plowman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Is there something that can't move forward? I don't. Hopefully, this isn't a rhetorical question. Is there something that can't move forward with regards to the ice, unless we go with this this contract for the master plan? I mean, are there going to be specifics provided by 292 regarding ice that we're not going to get unless we do this?
Mr. Christensen, our Public Works Director.
Mayor, members of the council, to both Councilmember Meske and Plowman's point, these two projects, the refrigeration system and the master plan, should be considered completely separate, in my opinion. Refrigeration system needs to happen. We know where it's going. We know where the ice is. The ice is there. It's not moving. So that doesn't need to be specifically in the master plan. What needs to be in the master plan is the rest of the $4 million worth of projects or future projects. So, in my opinion, these two are completely separate and should be separate entities and separate conversations.
Councilman Plowman.
Okay, then follow up. If they are then separate projects, then are those separate projects also on our short list? I was under the understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, I can eat crow, whatever, but was it the ice that's on our short list, or
yes.
was it the entire concept of the Civic Center master plan that was on our short list?
On the short list was the ICE was a critical function that we had to fund. The other thing is that the council at the retreat said they wanted to complete the master plan. Wanted to have a vote on the master plan, whether to do it or not. You took that vote, you asked staff to come back with a recommendation. Staff did that. Now staff is coming back to us with that recommendation. And so there was two pieces to the master plan piece, as the way I remembered it. Somebody correct me if I'm wrong as well. But the first is to have the vote as to whether or not we wanted to do the master plan. We did that a couple meetings ago. We went back, we secured, re-upped the proposals, and then that's before us tonight. And so tonight, we'll either vote that up or we'll vote that down. That will give the direction on what we'll do. But the ICE has to be done. I mean, that's at a critical, from what the council said, that was a top priority, and it's at a critical function point.
Just to clarify, I'm fully on board with that, and actually I'm fully on board with this, just not right now. That's just where I stand personally.
Councilmember Nelson.
So I understand the ICE is a separate project, but depending on the master plan, and if the curlers decide to build out there, if they decide to share in the ICE plant, if there would be the location of the ICE plant perhaps would be different, was my understanding. So while I understand they're two separate projects, how the building might look 10 years from now might determine where that ICE plant needs to be from what I was shared with. So I'm confused with the separation.
Sean, could you address that?
Can you try to draw the analogy between the building, the way the layout of the proposed building is? You've seen the preliminary plans for the curling club. The curling club has been online saying they want to have their own ice, but if we did do a shared ice, and we don't, I think that's what the question is. So can you share with us maybe a little different way how that delineation happens?
Sure, Mayor, members of the council, and Councilmember Nelson. Based on the need now, we have to put the refrigeration system in. We know where the two sheets of ice are. This project, the ICE project, the refrigeration plant project, includes provisions for a third sheet of ice. That being said, it also helps with the master plan after the refrigeration system is in, for them to determine where additional sheets of ice could be placed in proximity to this refrigeration system. So if that is curlers, if that's a third sheet of ice, if that's figure skaters, if that's more hockey, if that's whatever, the refrigeration system is in place. If the curlers want to go somewhere else on the site, it will require an additional refrigeration system for that building.
Councilman Nelson.
If I may. So you to me have just reinforced the reason that we need the master plan, because someone then has already decided where the third sheet of ice should be with where the ice plant's going to be located. And that's why I think the master plan needs to be looked at with whatever else people are talking about. If it's I'm not sure, is it a group looking at some sort of a dome? Are those types of things? From what I remembered from the master plan was to look at the space out there and to decide before we do something and then go, God, we shouldn't have put it there, we should have put it over here. And so I guess I'm still confused with what's coming first.
Mr. Mayor?
Councilmember Alvarado, I'm sorry.
I'm for the plan. I believe that in that community out there, we have a visionary school. We've got a kind of a visionary highway department. And I think for us to send a message as a progressive city, we have to have a plan in place where we can say, okay, we want to complement that area. We want to grow that correctly so that when somebody comes to visit Willmar, they can see that we did it right. So I think that taking the time, going to somebody that's in the know, telling them what we want, having them coming back with the best ideas, and then putting it in place, I believe that's what we have to do. If I ask Ron to build me a house, I'm going to ask for his advice because he builds houses. I'm going to have to trust what he's telling me. I don't build houses. I might say, hey, I want it this way and that way. He's going to laugh at me. He says, no, you don't. So I want to go to somebody that's in the know, that can guide us and show us a visionary project and get people that visit Willmar excited. You know, you look at that area, Midwest Technology Campus down the road, you look at the new school, you look at the Minnesota Department of Transportation, those are all top-notch facilities. I think that we want to be in that same league. So I'm for the going down the road and hiring an expert to help us on that project.
Okay, the motion on the table is to consider entering into an agreement for master plan consultant services in the amount of $47,375. Mr. Okins, have you identified a funding source? Funding source to be determined by the city finance director.
Mayor, members of the council, I'd try to pull Mr. Okins out from under the bus there, but
the bus, it's a train.
The funding source is yet to be determined.
Well, let's do a roll call on this one.
Councilmember Maskey.
Aye.
Plowman.
No.
Nelson.
Aye.
Christensen.
No.
Schwantes.
Aye.
Alvarado.
Aye.
Osmus.
Aye.
5 ayes, 2 nays.
That resolution does pass. Next is the mayor's proposal for Robbins Island Task Force, and I'm going to have Mr. Holland start that discussion, and then I will take it from there. So, Mr. Holland?
Members of the council, the mayor is making a recommendation that we appoint a Robbins Island Task Force. This would include 2 city staff members, 2 city council members, an individual from the following groups: the Rockin' Robbins Organization, the Destination Playground Group, Community Education Recreation Board, the Willmar Area Community Foundation, the mayor himself, SRF Consulting Group, and possibly additional community members. The reason the mayor is calling for this is there's additional improvements that people are proposing at Robbins Island Complex, and this task force would be in charge of looking at the various ideas and the different funding mechanisms for further planning and projects at the park. And so he is asking for an approval of this recommendation of forming this Robbins Island Task Force.
I make a motion that we approve the mayor's recommendation to appoint a Robbins Islands Task Force.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to approve the mayor's task force. I'll just make a couple comments. I've been out talking in the community after I brought it up to you as a council. There's a lot of interest in the community. I've had numerous phone calls, a lot of young families, a lot of people that have just recently moved into the community, and they're excited to be a part of it. And our philanthropic community also is very interested in us having a very clear plan on what we're going to do there. And so they've been asking me to get this done for probably about the last 6 months. Even before Robbins Island Destination Playground was completed, they were asking me, what's next? And we need to have a methodical plan on where we're going and the direction we're headed. So I would like to see the support for this, but I certainly would understand if council wanted to go a different direction. Additional discussion. All in favor of the motion as presented, signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. That motion does carry. Next is consideration of additional members to review the Rice Hospital Centric Care ACMC proposals. What you have done up to this point is you have allowed the city administrator, our city attorney, the mayor, and the liaison to Rice Hospital to serve as a clearinghouse, if you will, and gather information. I know that Rice has met with a number of the council members in addition to that, but as we had the presentation on Wednesday, there's a lot of details that have to be worked out here on this project. And we would kind of like to have a subgroup of the council, maybe one or two additional council members to serve on that. And then Rice Hospital's executive board would also serve on that. So they would have 3 members, along with Mr. Schramm and Mr. Fensky would serve on that. So what we would do is we would expand that to 2 additional people. And Mr. Scott, maybe you can clarify that a little bit. I think I've explained it fairly good, but I can't remember if I was supposed to give this to you or if I was supposed to do it. So I just went ahead, so go ahead.
You've done well, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. What's envisioned is that the council would form an ad hoc group of less than a quorum of its members to meet only as needed, to interact primarily with your Special Healthcare Transactions Council, CUTEC-ROC, as they start working through the process of kind of formulating their recommendations to the City Council, of interacting with the hospital board's attorney, with CentraCare's attorney, as this deal takes shape. I mean, this is going to be, there's 3-party negotiations. They're going to be very complicated. To be clear, this group, as contemplated, is not supposed to take the place of the full council. The full council will have to have discussions and give some policy direction to your Healthcare Transactions Council at a pretty early point here. The ad hoc group that has, again, been envisioned would be available to meet to kind of keep the communications with your Healthcare Transactions Council when they need to meet, when questions arise, to give your council some insight on when and how things should be brought to the full council, as well as to interact with the hospital board's executive committee. So to be clear, this is a group that we're recommending be formed just among the council, but a big part of the responsibility for this group will be to have some interactions with the hospital board's executive committee. Your hospital board is on the same side of this transaction as the council. It's important that the council be working cooperatively and not unintentionally stepping on toes or taking something up preliminarily when the hospital board hasn't had a chance to vet it yet. So it's just a way to keep the communication going as smoothly as possible. I think it's anticipated that most of these meetings, just by their nature, are going to have to occur during the day. There can be exceptions to that as needed, but I would imagine, and it's the kind of thing where you might have a day's notice, where your council wants to have a conference call with the group, you know, time tomorrow afternoon, what works for everybody, that kind of thing. So that's the idea. It's the recommendation. Again, you have the mayor and the hospital board liaison already kind of fulfilling this function. The recommendation would be to expand that group by 2 council members.
Councilmember Schwantes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, since we just did a motion to create a committee, for the playground, or excuse me, for Robbins Island, do you need a motion to do that for this subcommittee also?
Yes, we'll need a motion to do that as well. Then we'll have to select those members.
All right. I would make that motion.
Motion been made and seconded to create a ad hoc advisory committee made up of 3 members of the council, the mayor, the city administrator, and our legal counsel. Discussion. Councilmember Schwantes.
Second, then I would note that I would be very interested in serving on that.
Okay. Councilmember Osmus.
Mr. Mayor, I would also be interested in serving on that ad hoc advisory committee. I believe I would have the time during the day to participate in it.
Okay, let's get the first motion passed. I think, or should we take them just together? So we can take them together, I suppose, or?
If the council is ready to select the members, you can certainly make it all one motion. If you'd prefer to establish the group and then determine its composition, you can do it in 2 steps as well. I guess it's up to the council.
I'm hearing some on the council saying they want it 2 steps. Let's do it 2 steps. So the first is establishing the ad hoc committee. All those in favor of that signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. That motion carries. Next, we have 2 council members that have expressed an interest, Councilmember Schwantes and Councilmember Osmus. Again, can you go over kind of how long you think this is going to last? I mean, it's probably, the meetings can be called in fairly short order. I think the next one is called for September 25th at 10 a.m., I think is the next one that's called. Is that right, Mr. Holland?
Yes.
Yeah, that's been suggested by the hospital. Obviously, we'll confirm that works with.
We're waiting on tonight, right.
A member of this ad hoc group by the council. The idea is this group would remain in place as long as necessary. The hospital board and Centricare presented, I think, a pretty ambitious timeline to have this all completed by the first of the year. But you'd have this group together to meet and give guidance to your legal counsel as necessary. Again, interact with the hospital board as necessary as long as it takes. I don't know that you'd ever need a formal vote to disband the committee. It would just, once the contracts are voted on one way or the other, there'd be no need for it to meet again.
Okay. Council, anybody else? Councilmember Maskey.
Well, I'm curious, we heard at that meeting last week about trying, a request by several people to solicit information from whether it be employee groups, public, other stakeholders.
Mm-hmm.
We really haven't answered that or solved that by forming this committee. Are we ever going to address that, or is it our intent to not include those stakeholders in this process?
And I'll speak for my thought, and Councilmember Nelson can as well, along with staff. I think what we're looking at establishing here is to set some of those ground rules. And, what do we bring back to you? What's important, those types of things. I think that, as a council, we've said that we want to be as transparent as we can be in the process. So we do want to have that transparency. I know they are scheduled for one more public meeting. I can't remember the date of that, sometime in October. I think they gave us the date. Do you remember what the date was? Anybody remember the date?
Too many.
But, so I think, I understand what you're saying, Councilmember Maskey, but you're correct. This does not address that.
Well, and I guess I'm looking at perhaps because this is the first time this has ever happened for me and everybody else here. I heard very clear Centricare's plan and what they've laid out, and most of it was financial, and it moved around responsibilities and authority. I heard also several times that we were going to have local control, local decision-making, and I heard from our board that they haven't had they don't have those details.
Right.
Do those details end up coming into a lease? Is that where we address the details of things like patient care, employee status, and those types of things? Or do we just, I guess that's a good question to start with.
Well, I think one of the things you have to remember is the hospital board's seen that for the first time, the same time we've seen it.
I totally understand that.
But I'll send it over to our city attorney because he's had some additional conversations with their attorneys as well, so.
Yeah, Councilmember Maskey, the short answer to your question is those details will be in the contract documents. We're just beginning the process of sorting through those documents and starting to negotiate them. I think what we have are essentially a proposal from Centricare where we have drafts that have been put together by the transaction council. But both the city council and the hospital board have to begin the work of rolling up their sleeves and looking at those. This will come to the full council at some point fairly early. But I do think it would be extremely beneficial to have this kind of working group together to provide some guidance to legal counsel as far as how the process unfolds.
And I totally understand all of that and everything that's said. I get that. My question is, when do you bring on board the stakeholders when you're dealing with a public entity? When do you bring the public on board to address patient care, employee levels, and those types of things? I don't know where you bring those in on the process, but they better be brought in on the process somewhere.
Yeah, I believe they'll be brought in on the process, and we certainly can have that. Mr. Holland, can we make sure we have that as an agenda item for the 25th?
How do you want to, entitle that?
Just a simple question of when are we going to involve the public process? I think that's what you're asking.
I think, as someone who's went through this a couple of times, yes, you involve the hospital staff. Yes, you involve the community. Yes, you involve the ambulance district. Yes, you involve the emergency providers. All of these type of questions have to be done, and it's even more complex here because of all the different partnerships that Rice has entered into, in particular with ACMC. So I don't think there's a cut and dry answer. If I could say, in 3 weeks we'll have that group, or in 4 weeks. It depends is the correct answer when you bring these people in and get their opportunities. One of the things that I keep talking about is that the community has to support this decision.
Right.
Exactly.
And so I've encouraged Rice and CentraCare to develop a website specifically for this project. And it's entitled in that way. And people can post questions, and then the answers can be posted on that website. That was one of the tools that I'm familiar with in my last position in Missouri. And I found it very instrumental because then people could get the answers to their questions. And even if the answer was, it depends, at least they got an answer for the interim. And so, or we'll have that answer in 3 weeks, a better, type of answer. And that keeps that communication flow going. And I know I sound like a broken record, but it is about communication. And for this deal to be successful, it requires not only your vote, but I think certainly the community support and the employee support. And the only way they're going to get on board is if they're part of the process and they can submit their ideas and suggestions. And I don't think anybody's, whether you're a community member or an employee, has unrealistic expectations that you're going to get 100% of everything that you want. No one ever does in any type of negotiation. But you do expect to have your ideas and expectations heard and, realistically considered. And so that's why I'm saying I don't know if you want to put that as what you're wanting to discuss further, because you're not going to have answers to that in 2 weeks. That's what I'm saying.
Well, I'm not saying we need an answer. I'm just saying we need it as an agenda item so it gets talked about. We're hearing it loud and clear in the community. The community's telling us that. I was out at the Constitution Day yesterday, and I had half a dozen people come up to me and say, when's the public going to have input? Well, it's got to be on the to-do list. And if it's not on the to-do list, it's not going to get addressed. And I think that's what we're hearing from Councilmember Meske. He's saying, let's get it on the list, let's talk about it. And the answer might be exactly what you said, it depends. But at least we're starting to get out there. And I think what you're saying is engage the public as quick as we can.
Right, and I think City Administrator Holland has probably nailed it, that, you've recommended this website and other things, that's the start to get that involvement. I wasn't looking for a date.
No, I understand.
I was looking for a commitment.
You were looking for a commitment to do it.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. That's what I heard as well.
Yep.
Right. Councilmember Nelson.
I just was going to comment, I'm hopeful when we have this first meeting that we'll find out what they have been working on, because I do think they are working on a plan. I do think they are sensitive to those things. And I think we're now going to get to this point in time, so whether it's appropriate for us to put it on the agenda, I'm hoping it's already there. And I think, that we need to listen to what they have been working on and to see what else we can come to the table and say, what else do we need? But I think we need to give them a chance, just like they needed a chance to review the documents. With that, I think now we're getting to the point where we can have a back and forth with, tell us what and we can share things we're hearing too. So I'm very positive that that will happen, and I think we've got to allow the process to take place.
Motion on the table is to appoint Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have on my calendar October 5th at 5 o'clock at the conference center is the next meeting with the hospital.
Julie just told me she had the 3rd, so does anybody know the real date?
the 3rd and the 5th are both kicked around. I haven't seen a confirmation, but
We'll get it to you.
I may have not gotten something
But I
today.
mentioned that because isn't the public invited there also?
Yes, that's another open town hall sort of meeting.
That's half of our getting the public involved.
Yes.
I'm sure the nurses will be there.
Sure, I bet they will.
I was just going
So
to...
the motion on the table is to approve Councilmember Osmus and Councilmember Schwantes to serve on this committee. Then we can have additional discussion after that, contrary to what the motion is, or outside of what the motion is. Trying to get the motion taken care of. All those in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
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 Those opposed, same sign. That motion does carry. City Administrator Holland.
I just want to say to, especially the people in the audience, that, everybody wants to give input, but here's something you need to think about. Input to what? Because we haven't even got the documents yet. So there's no need for input when we don't know yet what we're talking about. So no one's, by saying, oh, well, you're not getting my input, that's not saying that you're not going to get your input. It's just saying not now. Because this council, the hospital board, they still have to go through this and look at the objections. The lawyers that we hired, that's what they're going to do. They're going to do their due diligence. And so I think you have to get to a certain point before you start to get that public input. So I hope that better explains what I was trying to explain.
With that explanation, I will entertain a motion to accept Councilmember Schwantes and Councilmember Osmus as the members to serve on the ad hoc committee.
So moved.
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Discussion. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. That motion does pass the second time, even though it passed without the motion the first time. So anyways, thank you so much. City Administrator comments.
I just wanted to make one quick comment. This weekend, I went out to is it the Prairie Environmental Center, Learning Center?
Prairie Woods.
Yeah, I had trouble finding it anyway, so I should know the name of it, and maybe I can get there. But I went out there, and Hemline University is conducting a survey and some research right now in our community. And I was contacted, and I was asked to go out to speak to this group of about 40 people. And I did that gladly. But I want to pass on one thing that I asked. They go through a series of questions, and they're specifically talking about our local government. What are the functions of the council? What are the functions of the mayor? What are the functions and duties and responsibilities of the city administrator? And they were going step by step, and in very excruciating detail, I would say, based on what I saw. But they asked me several questions, but they had prioritized what is important to them for local government. And they didn't put it up on the board, so I made a point before I left. I said, would you mind sharing with me, because these are residents of, my community. And so I'm going to just share that with you, and I think that you will recognize these are the top 4 things this group of 40 recognized their expectations from local government. Number 1 was trust. Number 2 was communications or transparency. Number 3, accountability. And number 4, their top 4 things that they want the council to provide the local government a strategic vision. This sounds very familiar. And so I wanted to pass that on because those are the 4 things that I know that we talked about in our retreat this year. And so I think that gives you a little confirmation that you're on the right track. So that's all I wanted to pass on, Mayor. Thank you.
Thank you. Under the mayor's announcements, one of the things we as a council need to start working on and thinking about is Mr. Holland's review. And so he's about 2 months out from having to have that review completed. Now, we have a little catch in the giddy up here, because when Mike was with us, and we had talked with Mike about maybe coming back and helping us with that process. And Mike has accepted a position with the city of Faribault as their interim city administrator. And so he called and talked to me, and so I took liberty to talk with Ike about that. And I feel very confident that between Bridget and Ike and you as a council, we can get this done internally. I think that we can tell Mike that, Mr. McGuire, that, thanks for the offer, but now that you're working for Faribault, put your attention there. We can keep our attention here locally. I think in Ike's note to the council on Friday, he said if you have some concerns or you have questions about what he's doing, get in touch with him today. Don't wait until we have the formal evaluation. Just have that open communication. And I can tell you firsthand in my interactions with Ike, when I've had a question and I call him, I go in and meet with him. He's very easy to talk with. And so we don't need any surprises when we come to do the review. But I would really like us to do it ourselves. That's part of that trust piece. That's part of building that trust. It's building trust with our staff. It's building trust with our administrator. It's building trust with the 9 of us that sit at this table, that we can do a good job. So I certainly would like to know if the council favors that as well, and if somebody even wanted to be so bold as to say, you know what, let's make a motion to get a hold of Mike and tell him we're not going to need his services. It's up to the council what they wish to do, but that's a comment to have. Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When did you speak to him?
When I speak to Mike?
Yeah.
Oh man, I've talked to him 3 times in the last 2 weeks.
I spent several hours with him and his significant other on Saturday in Prior Lake.
Oh, perfect. You have more information than I have, more current.
And he asked me why he hadn't been asked to come back and help with the evaluation. And I said, well, I'll bring it up, because he offered that. Now, I guess I would feel better if he came. I mean, he did a terrific job for us here. And unless somebody opposes that, I would say let's take him up on it. I enjoyed visiting with him. By the way, he said to say hi to everybody. He was here for the longest term of any interim administrator. He said usually it's 3-4 months, but it was like 8 or 9 here. So, but he had mentioned, why he hadn't been asked to, because he knew it was coming up. So I would be all in favor of him coming back here and helping us out.
Okay, Councilmember Nelson, followed by Schwantes.
Okay. I was just questioning because I think we wanted to make sure we had a process in place. So I thought we had agreed to a process to do this 6-month evaluation and a form. So I'm asking, but also clarifying that we stay with what we set in place. So, but I'm hoping I'm remembering that correctly. But I think one of the concerns that we had previously is that we didn't have a process or a form in place. And I thought that's part of what we had asked Mike to make sure we had in place, Mr. McGuire, that we had in place. So I'm just asking for clarification on that, and I think I'm agreeing that we should stay with the process. So.
Yeah, we did have a process in place, and yes, we did say that we were going to have Mr. McGuire come back. That is correct. He and I talked middle of last week. I didn't talk to him as recently as Councilmember Christensen did, and I told him I was bringing it up tonight. I told him it was going to be an agenda item tonight. So, but Councilmember Schwantes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was simply going to ask, what role would he play, and what actions would he take, what activities would he do that it would make it worthwhile bringing him versus being able to have our own staff do those same steps?
Sure. My understanding is that he would have the data, he would send out the forms to the council, he would collect the information, compile the data that we sent to him, and then he would sit down and facilitate the discussion between the council and the city administrator. Councilmember Christensen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it'd be very helpful because, the last, 10, 12 years, we haven't had a real process for evaluating the administrator. There was no checklist to go by, and I think it'd be very helpful. He's done it many, many times, and he said he was never going to take another interim job, and he's had 4 requests, and he's canceled 3 of them. But I think it'd be very helpful in giving us a process that maybe we can follow from here on out, because we haven't had a very good process. We've had 3, 4, 5 different forms to fill out, and I didn't feel comfortable with any of them, really. They weren't questions that I would evaluate somebody on, but we need a list that we can evaluate on. He gave us a few. I believe you gave us some when you came here. Some points that you wanted to be evaluated on. I don't know where I put them, but I think you expressed that to us at one of our early meetings. So I think it'd be helpful just for the process to get us through this. And yeah, I'd share Councilperson Nelson's feelings on this. Let's keep them.
And I think one of the things we have to remember is that, we had a process in place, and, at least we're following a process now where before, it was, we were at 6 months, and then we started talking about should we do an evaluation or not. And then we discussed that for 2 months, if we should do one or not. So at least we're on the front side of it. So Councilmember Meske.
I'm in the business of evaluation, and I will tell you that my recollection is we have not had a very good instrument to evaluate. We haven't had measurable outcomes that were defined. There's usually here's a list of activities we would like you to do. You run into great problems when it comes time to evaluate, when all you have is a list of activities that isn't going to evaluate what you wanted to evaluate. Any city administrator is going to be able to come up with an evaluation technique or an evaluation tool to do that evaluation. My question was, and it'd be for the last 2 administrators that I have seen, is we don't have a 6-month evaluation tool, and so if you don't have expectations that you have laid out beforehand for the person to achieve, I'm going to give them a great recommendation, because it's our job to come up with an evaluation tool that you give to the person before they start working, and then you evaluate how they've achieved that. We're doing it backwards. You hire the person and you come up with a list of activities, and now we say we want to create the evaluation tool at the time to evaluate them. I think that's backwards in my mind. We needed to have the tool and expectations up front, and then you evaluate them at 6 months. And I don't know what value bringing back the other city administrator will have in evaluating our city administrator we currently have.
Well, we did develop a list prior to him coming. When Mr. McGuire developed that, gave that to Mr. Holland, and so he had that of what we were going to have him look at. Right. And so, we need to pull all that stuff back up. If council wants to continue that direction, we need to resurrect all that. And I'm just wanting us to get going on this rather than, not do anything with it. And then all of a sudden sit there at 6 months and go, oh man, we should have evaluated him a month ago. So,
I understand.
That's what I'm trying to do. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor Kelvin. I'm agreeing with what Councilmember Meske is saying, but I thought we'd had that conversation since we weren't successful with the previous getting it done. So I thought we had put those checks and balances in place. And so that's, I guess, still the question of, is that what Mr. McGuire is prepared to do? Do we have the list to do that 6 months evaluation, and that would make it beneficial for him to continue with what he started and to finish with the form that we had hopefully agreed on, because we spent a great deal of time arguing about what form we were going to use.
Right.
And I thought we had put a process in place not to do that this time.
Sure. So I had told Mr. McGuire that I was going to get back with him. Would you like me to get back with him and tell him that we would like him to use him, or do we want to take a vote on this? I mean, I'm kind of seeing that, I guess I haven't heard from everybody, but is that the direction we're looking that we want to go here?
We're going to do it.
I don't want a motion on this. Holy buckets. I mean, if you want to continue the direction we're going, raise your hand. If you don't, keep your hand down.
Is that to bring him back or not?
To bring him back, to bring Mike back, Mr. McGuire. Or, I mean, I'm getting mixed messages here. I'm seeing some of the council giving me this, no, I don't want to do it. I'm seeing some of the council saying, yeah, I want to. Where are we at, folks? You need to give me some direction.
I think it was this council that decided we should.
That's correct. It is this council.
And I think we should go that route, personally.
Councilman Nelson.
I'd like clarification that we do have a process in place. And if we do, then
Would you
follow
like
through
to,
with
would you like to get that and review that and make sure we have that?
it. I'm trusting that if it's there, but I'm confused with, it didn't sound like it was, so I thought we were very careful about making sure that we didn't get to 6 months and do the same thing we did the last time. So I thought we had put a process in place.
There is no form. There is no evaluation. He didn't produce one before he left, and he hasn't created one since then. I haven't produced one. The only thing that has been given to me since I arrived here was a list of priorities that needed to be done within the first 6 months. I remember watching specifically Mike sitting here saying to the mayor, that's on the agenda tonight, and he said, Ike's got the list, let's move on. And that was the extent of the conversation. Upon my arrival, I was given a list of items. I have that list of items. So if we want to evaluate me on that, that's what was provided to me. You can go down the list and say, yes, he did it, or no, he didn't. It's just that simple. But to me, to be honest, I talked to the mayor and I said, everywhere I've been, I've created my own evaluation form. Why? That's my background. I have an HR background. I know how to evaluate people myself. I've done it my whole career. I even know how to make it biased if I want to. Okay?
Sure you do.
I can do that. But I try to provide an evaluation that's fair to myself and to those that are evaluating me, and so that they can be honest. And I try to make it on a scale where you can rate 1 through 5 or 1 through 10. And I can also leave part of it where it's wide open so you can make comments. You do it in different various ways. Because at the end of the day, like I've told the mayor, is I want to do what you're requesting, not my priorities, what this council wants. And so that's what the evaluation should be about. Have I been producing and providing those things that help you do your job better? Same thing with the employees. And I've had that done before, where the employees even evaluate me. I've even had community members evaluate me. But I don't think that paying a consultant to develop a form, to come out here and to be the moderator is, a best way to spend money. I just listed off the top 4 things that a community wants. I understand that. That's what this council understands. And, one of the things that sometimes it's difficult for councils is to discuss, in an executive session or even in an open forum, how I'm performing. And so I don't have that expectation that every one of you will want to, have that, back and forth with me. It's really not a back and forth as far as I'm concerned. You look at the list of things and you tell me yes or no. So that's the way I look at it. So if you wanted to hear my input on it, I guess I would say that I think we can do it in-house. I appreciate Mike's work while he was here, no doubt, and he did a great job from what I understand. But I think on this forum that we can produce something that will satisfy everyone, and we can have it in your hands, this week, and you can look it over, and if you want to add or delete to it and kick it back, we can do that. So that's it.
I would make a motion that we have our city administrator draft that form and disseminate that form to the council for our review for either acceptance or amendment by next meeting.
Second.
Motion made and seconded to have the city administrator develop a evaluation form to evaluate the administrator and his performance. Discussion. Councilmember Alvarado.
Include that list of expectations, would you please? No, you said you...
I would certainly do that, yes.
Thank you.
All in favor of the motion is Councilmember Nelson.
I guess I'd like to see some standard language in the evaluation form, too. And I'm really frustrated. This was a concern that we get it done ahead of time. So I'm really frustrated that we are now 4 months into this and don't have a process in place. I'm open to your form, but I'd like to see some standard questions and some things in there that will help us to be able to walk through the process and set future how we're going to evaluate you in 6 months.
So just so I have an understanding, you said standard, you want the process as far as the evaluation, instructions, is that what am I understanding?
I don't want a blank piece of paper. I want some standard
No.
categories and those types of things.
It'll-
Things that you use for your other staff. I'm not sure.
It will be everything from open forum to true or false, perhaps, to even, you evaluate excellent, good, great, those type of things. So it's not going to be a blank sheet of paper and do you think, he did a good job, yes or no? I think I told the mayor my worst evaluation ever was a councilman wrote, well, so far, so good. And that was it, on the entire document. So that doesn't help me do my job. And so, but he was uncomfortable, obvious, with giving me an evaluation. And so I don't think he was trying to be funny either. It turned out funny now. I laugh at it, but it was confusing at the time. So I want to produce a document that makes me a better administrator at the same time that I'm being evaluated. So, thank you.
Councilmember Meske.
I share that frustration, but my frustration is not with the city administrator at all. We've had an ongoing problem, and after the 6 months, I would assume that we'll also be able to look at new goals and outcomes that we expect, and that's the type of process. And when you have the goals and outcomes and you meet them, it's easy to evaluate. Evaluation of the city administrator is the job of the council. It is not the job of a consultant, and I think that we're up for the job, and we can finally get this thing taken care of, because we've been relatively lax on evaluating in the past.
Councilmember Nelson.
So after your comments, Councilmember Muskie, I need to clarify. I'm not frustrated with the administrator. I am frustrated with the fact that we are now having this conversation for your sake. I thought we had a process in place so that you didn't have to go through that. And that's what my frustration is because we've been through so many hurdles before, we said, let's make sure we don't do this, and here we are again. So I apologize for that. That's my frustration.
All in favor of the motion to have the city administrator develop a evaluation form, bring it back to the next meeting for our review and acceptance, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. That motion does carry. The next thing that I'd like to advise the public about is an event on Thursday at 5:30 at WEAC. It's called Hope Out Loud. It's for families who have either suffered suicide within their family or are people that are just wanting to get together to talk and make a stronger community. Would ask people to come to that. There's a lot of literature out in the public about that, and so would like to make sure we have a good attendance from the council there as well. Also, the Blue Cross Blue Shield community meals start tomorrow, and so the first one is tomorrow, and then they have another one, I believe, on Saturday of this week, and then another one Tuesday of next week. And so if you, I think they still had openings this morning in the one on Saturday, but all the rest of them were full. So hopefully the council has been in tune to that, and hopefully that we'll have good attendance at those three meetings as well. I was also going to talk about the Willmar Community Assembly that Mr. Holland talked about. Again, their first meeting was last Saturday. They're going for 2 consecutive weeks, and then I will be presenting the last day, and then they're going to give me the formal report at the conclusion of that, their last day. I'll be there for the last few hours of their meeting on the last day that they're meeting. And so that's good work happening within our community and a lot of positive things happening. So I believe I start with Councilmember Plowman this time. Anything for council comments?
No comments at this time.
Councilmember Nelson.
I'll pass.
Christensen.
My sewer works.
Pass.
Fernando.
Nothing, thank you.
Osmus.
I don't have anything either.
Mr. Meske.
Good night.
Good night. I'll entertain a motion.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
We're adjourned.